Yeah, it's 1:04. All right, I'm not even gonna go 30 seconds. We're gonna go forth. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Haas. I'm a director with Enterprise Community Partners out of our Southeast Market office. I'm actually in Atlanta, Georgia, but pre-COVID spent quite a bit of time in Miami and look forward to the time when I get to come back. We're excited today to be here with you to present our new Southeast small multifamily preservation toolkit, Tipping the Scale. This is focused on the preservation of small to medium multifamily properties, which are 49 units or less. And actually, many of the folks on this call probably know, but this property type actually provides the majority of the affordable housing in the US and isn't typically protected by any sort of subsidy source or affordability restrictions. So it's really very much so at risk to market changes and pressures. This toolkit does provide a deep dive into Miami and Atlanta. You'll see as you explore it. But really a lot of the ideas and central tenets can be applied anywhere. So we hope that it's a tool that can be used throughout the Southeast and elsewhere. At Enterprise, we created this toolkit in partnership with the Enterprise Advisors team, which is our kind of consulting arm of Enterprise. And I'm joined today by Zach Patton, Laura Steerfoss, and Ann Jordan, who led this work. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into content. As someone noted before, we have disabled the chat just so that it's not too confusing, and we'll be using the Q&A. I'm going to ask that you enter any questions you have during the presentation in that box, and then for the majority of those, we'll then get to them at the end of the session, unless there's something urgent we need to jump on right away. Folks are muted, but as we just saw, if you need to say something, feel free to raise your hand and we'll grab that. And then lastly, we are recording this session and do plan to then share that recording link. So just want folks to be aware of that. And let's go forth. So I first want to take time to thank our funders. This work would not have happened without the generous funding from a variety of different folks, and specifically want to highlight the very generous support of JPMorgan Chase, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Health Foundation of South Florida, and State Farm. We're really excited to be able to produce this work and couldn't have done it without them. I also want to highlight all the work that our partners and many stakeholders put into this toolkit. Folks who are nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, advocates, financing entities, public sector partners, and many others helped us out with this toolkit, providing project details, reviewing materials, sitting on calls, in meetings, etc. And really greatly appreciate your support. And do have a full list of all the folks who helped us out with this toolkit in the online version as well. So thank you very much. So as we look at our agenda, we're going to take a little time to talk about why we created this and how we did it. Then we'll spend some time walking through the actual online toolkit itself. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time today doing a deep dive into two of the tools, the evaluation scorecard and the interactive financial model, which we think will be really useful in the real world, which is our goal with this toolkit, and want to make sure that folks really understand how to utilize them and how to apply them to work. And then lastly, we spend a little time taking a look at the project profiles of actual small multifamily deals that have happened in Miami, Atlanta, and elsewhere in the country. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about why we created this and where it came from. So over the past few years, Enterprise has been focused on affordable housing preservation in the Southeast with a particular focus on Atlanta and Miami. Through this work and others' efforts in Miami, opportunities have arisen which have really prioritized the preservation of affordable housing, especially smaller properties under 49 units. And again, I'm sure folks know in Miami there's a significant inventory of 10 to 20 unit older properties, especially in culturally significant neighborhoods. In Miami, the work that this aligns a lot with, first, Enterprise and Miami Homes for All released a preservation action plan a little over a year ago. There have been the Connect Capital effort, the City Housing Plan, and the County Housing Framework, all of which highlight the need to preserve the affordability of the affordable housing we currently have. So we felt like it was really important that we created tools to help address some of the challenges in preserving that stock. So through our work, we have identified some challenges, right? There's a reason that the preservation of these smaller properties isn't happening en masse. What you are seeing a lot of is value add acquisitions and then rent increases, or where you have obsolescence, demolition, and then something new and not affordable going up. What we found in working with partners is that we have limited nonprofit and or mission-aligned for-profit engagement in the preservation of small to medium multifamily in Miami, but that there's significant stock at risk. We also have found that there aren't a lot of resources aligned with this stock, though in Miami there actually are some new resources at the county level, city level that are focused on this stock, so that's really exciting to see. But want to make sure that as we think about building capacity of folks, we're also thinking about the capital tools that are necessary to preserve these properties. This tool itself was really developed with developers in mind, so nonprofit and smaller for-profit mission-aligned developers. However, we do feel that a lot of the information and tools would be very useful for existing property owners as well, and are interested in how we can support existing smaller owners in preserving their stock and ensuring its affordability and its quality where that's of interest to them. So that's kind of why we did it and why we felt this was an important tool to create. I'm going to pass now to Ann Jordan to talk a bit about how we actually created this.
Thanks, Sarah, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So with that context in mind, we started by identifying some key questions at each step of the development process that may present unique challenges or opportunities for smaller scale preservation efforts. And to ensure we weren't duplicating effort, we conducted a thorough literature review of existing reports and recommendations about unsubsidized SMMF properties and preservation. Most existing resources did focus on the preservation of larger or subsidized properties, which we think underscores the need for tools like this that are targeted specifically at this segment of the affordable housing stock. But we were able to use that existing research to identify some likely impacts on the smaller unsubsidized properties that we were focused on. From there, we conducted interviews with more than 50 experts, as Sarah mentioned, that included developers, funders, realtors, nonprofits, local government staff, and more. Many people we interviewed worked specifically in Atlanta, Miami, or provided national expertise. We also interviewed several experts from other markets where more of this work to preserve SMMF properties is already underway to identify any replicable lessons learned. These activities, plus additional quantitative and qualitative research, provided the foundation for each of the tools that we'll discuss today. So we have some of the experts from Miami that helped build this tool with us on today's webinar. So I'll give things back to Sarah to introduce them.
Great, thanks so much, Ann. So we at Enterprise recognize that partnership is really critical, especially when we're not on the ground. As I noted, I'm in Atlanta. Two of our key partners in Miami are Miami Homes for All and the South Florida Community Development Coalition, and we really couldn't do the work that we're doing without them. So I'm excited to be joined today by Annie Lord, the Executive Director of Miami Homes for All, and Renata Reeder, the Executive Director of the South Florida Community Development Coalition, to say a few words. So Annie, I'll pass to you first.
Well, sure, and thanks so much for all the work that you and everyone at Enterprise has been doing, and for all the folks, many of whom are on the phone, who contributed to inform this work. And I just wanted to say that this has been an effort by Enterprise, you know, and Miami Homes for All has been involved as well for several years now. And it's such an important element to our affordable housing ecosystem and what we actually invest in constructing, right, in rehabbing. Going forward, we've got to stop the bleeding before we can actually increase our affordable housing stock in Miami, and that's probably more so now than ever due to the economic shutdown from the pandemic. So, you know, the plan that Sarah just alluded to that we put out with Enterprise a year ago, you know, the 3 categories of recommendations we had were to build the capacity of the ecosystem, especially developers, to do preservation work, to change policies that would encourage preservation, and to align capital sources to support preservation. And this tool, along with the other work that Enterprise has been engaged in, this tool does a lot in all 3 of those areas, because it's really going to provide badly needed additional capacity for mission-aligned developers. It's going to inform policy changes and exactly what kinds of, for example, zoning benefits would really help make these deals pencil out. And then, of course, aligning exactly the kind of capital, the kinds of products, financing products that we need to make these kinds of deals happen. So once again, thanks so much to Enterprise for this great work.
Okay. Thanks, Annie. We've greatly enjoyed working with you guys over the years and look forward to more. Renata, pass to you.
Hello, and I just want to echo what Annie said. Thank you all for having us today, and thank you all for allowing us to help and partner on this project. Especially SFCDC is a membership and coalition building organization. And one of the critical components of our mission is expanding the capacity of the community development field to develop affordable housing for low to moderate income individuals. And one of the ways that we've been doing this is through our small scale development work and our capacity building programs. So we see this as an extension of that. And we look forward to promoting and encouraging the use of this tool with membership, the developers, and the community stakeholders. And we see this as a critical element to preserving affordable housing moving forward. So couldn't be more excited and look forward to working and engaging with you all to promote the use of the toolkit moving forward.
Great, thanks, Renata. The same. More webinars in our future. We'd hope to do this in person, but alas, here we are on Zoom. So, thanks so much. All right, so now we're going to actually dig into the toolkit itself. We'll spend a little bit more time on PowerPoint, and then we will shift over into the website and check out that functionality. So I am going to actually pass to Anne to kick us off on this.
Great. So this table of contents here is what we'll walk through in more detail on the online interactive version in just a second. But first, just wanted to ground the group in what you can expect to find there. We really followed the preservation process from stage to stage, highlighting common barriers and tips for success throughout. So everything from identifying potential partners and properties, securing financing, building a rehabilitation plan to long-term property management is covered here. We also include some data on the unsubsidized SMMF housing stock nationally and in Atlanta and Miami, some notes on how key partners may be different or may have different expectations in this kind of deal, tips on identifying strong targets for preservation within the small to medium multifamily space, guidance on the financing that is available, including some resource guides, and how to make this funding work all the way through deal negotiation and closing, as well as some key considerations that may impact your rehabilitation plan and some low-cost property management solutions. So on the next slide, we highlight a couple key strategies for success in preserving this kind of housing, really that cut across those different development stages. Sarah and I will run through each of these as we take you through the toolkit, and we'll revisit each of them, but this is just a quick preview. So with that, I'll share my screen so you can see what each of these components looks like in the toolkit itself. Let's see if we can get it up here. So you should now be seeing my screen. And if you're interested in clicking around yourself, you can find this toolkit by going to sepreservation.enterprisecommunity.org. Again, that is sepreservation.enterprisecommunity.org. And as we go through each of those overarching preservation strategies for the small to medium multifamily stock, Sarah and I will highlight different components of the toolkit relevant to each action. So starting with the end instead of the beginning here, the conclusion is where you'll find each of those overarching strategies that were quickly shown on that last slide. And the first one up is portfolio-based approaches for economies of scale. So pursuing the preservation of multiple affordable SMMF properties at the same time, particularly multiple properties that are located near one another, can help achieve greater economies of scale that can increase access to financial products, improve the feasibility of different rehabilitation options, and expand efficient options for your property management operations. And we know this strategy may particularly impact the partners you work with, as well as your property management practices. So I'll use this moment to go through some of what you'll find in both the relationship building section and property management section. So first up, navigating to the relationship building section, we not only outline the key types of partnerships that you may want to build and how they may differ during an SMMF preservation deal, but also outline where you may find these partners specifically in Miami and Atlanta. So here you should see that overview of the key partners that may be involved in the process. And then we go down to how those relationships may differ for this type of preservation deal. And finally, we have some figures that show where those different partners may be in Atlanta and Miami, with links to where you can find more information and contact information for each. In the property management section, there is more information on the need for economies of scale, plus a project spotlight on innovative property management approaches and some strategies that can further minimize operating expenses. So on the screen, you see here some of that overview. We'll let you navigate and read through it for yourself as you're interested. This blue box is that project spotlight on some innovative partnerships for property management that allow for mutually reinforcing activities that build on partners' strengths, as well as some of those options about minimizing operating expenses here. And then in the appendix, we have several project profiles, and one of them really is a great example of this strategy of that portfolio approach. That would be the Washington at Woodlawn Park, where POA, the developer in the area, preserved 16 SMMF buildings in Chicago. And you can read all about some of the key takeaways about what would be replicable in other deals, the financing that was used, plus more information about the developer themselves, the neighborhood it was in, special features of the project, and the impact on the community. Great. So just checking quickly, I saw some things popping in the chat, but it seems like we're all good. And with that, I'll turn to the conclusion again to talk about our next key overarching strategy about strategic acquisition. So we know that choices made during property identification and acquisition have far-reaching effects on other stages of the preservation process and the project's long-term viability. So calibrating your property choices to the surrounding market conditions is critical, especially when you're dealing with an unsubsidized property. Key considerations that are discussed in this section include whether the property can be acquired off-market, if it's in a neighborhood where you already work or have relationships, if the property doesn't need major repairs, and if it does not require tenant relocation to complete the rehabilitation. So to enable this, I'll highlight a couple tools from the introduction and property identification sections. In the introduction, this is where there's some more grounding on the SMMF landscape nationally and specifically in the Atlanta and Miami areas. We provide data on the distribution of SMMF properties by size, by level of affordability, and whether they are subsidized or not, which can help you identify how your acquisition strategy may fit into the larger landscape, especially as you make the case for your project to others. So here we see this for Atlanta. There's a narrative overview of each of those components I just mentioned, as well as some graphs on the distribution. You can hover over and see some more specific data points related to each of the items. It's worth noting here that we used the renter median income when discussing income levels, as opposed to the area median income, which would cover both homeowners and renters, since the focus of this toolkit is really on how the unsubsidized SMMF stock can be better used for affordable rental housing, since it already is such an important, critical part of the rental housing stock in most communities. And this graph really shows how big a role it's playing in serving those lower income levels of renters. We have the same information specific to Miami in terms of size, affordability level, and subsidy. And we see that very few affordable SMMF units are subsidized. That's true in both Miami, Atlanta, and across the country. And again, those graphs that you can check out for more information on the landscape in the Miami-Dade County area. So from there, I'll cover the property identification section, which provides a variety of tools to help guide this process, including evaluation scorecards that can help you pick among potential preservation targets based on likely project feasibility. And we'll discuss those in more depth in just a little bit. But these scorecards are designed to really walk you through 4 key characteristics of your property. So characteristics that are specific to the property itself, characteristics that may impact project feasibility, and then neighborhood conditions, both the neighborhood market conditions as well as neighborhood access to amenities and resources. You'll see a link to download the evaluation scorecards that have been made specific to local considerations in Atlanta and Miami, as well as an overview of how your property identification and the overall preservation of this type of property may look different in different market conditions. As we scroll down, there are some additional tips for your consideration in identifying a property for preservation. And then there are relationship building tips as you think about working with a broker to identify SMMF properties, as well as tips on working with existing property owners, noting where there might be owners that are more likely to be strong partners for this kind of work. And finally, rounding it out with a summary of some of the local conditions in Atlanta and Miami, which have been accounted for in the evaluation scorecards, but are really intended to help align preservation goals in each of these different markets. So with that, I'll pass things over to Sarah, who will run through the remaining 3 strategies that are highlighted throughout the toolkit.
Great, thanks, Anne. Okay, I'm gonna stop your sharing and then I'm gonna start mine. All right, so hopefully everyone is now seeing the website on my screen. Oh, hold on. Does Zoom come back? Okay, all good. So I'm going to talk a bit first about financing. So again, starting with our conclusion section. Financing right-sized to market conditions and property needs. So this is really critical as we think about small to medium multifamily stock, because again, we often don't have tools which are as readily available or evident in the affordable housing space for this smaller stock. And often, a lot of the costs of financing and processes you have to go through are the same whether you're working with a large deal or a small one, so the efficiencies just aren't there. Some things we want to highlight here that we created to help you both think through the capital you need to make your deal work, as well as to better understand what is out there and who provides that capital, are in a couple of spots. So first, we have the securing financing section of the website. And the first thing I'd like to highlight here is the financial modeling tool. In this section, you'll find the downloadable comprehensive versions, but we also, in the tools and downloads section, have the interactive version, which Zach will be reviewing shortly. Sorry, my computer is a little slower than we like. Here it comes. There we go. This is an interactive tool, a Miami version and an Atlanta version. And again, Zach's going to walk through that in great detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Second, as we go back to the securing financing section, we also highlighted some national tools that are available, both federal and other, as well as some financing tools and programs that are available for resilience, especially given Miami. I think this is really critical. What we've tried to do with all of these sections on tools is provide links directly to the tool website themselves to make sure that as these things update, as they will, they evolve, they change, priorities shift, we want to make sure that folks always have access to the most up-to-date information. Lastly, in the tools and downloads section, we created resource guides for each city. So if you look here for Miami, you're actually able to filter these by entity that administers the program. Once you click on the item, it will pull up additional information and again, links directly to additional information. This is, again, really critical because priorities do shift, typically annually at least. And it could be that right now there isn't a small multifamily set aside, but next year there is. And so again, wanted to make sure folks had a picture of kind of the full environment and then would be able to better understand the different entities that play a role in this work. So again, we have Florida Community Loan Fund as a CDFI that operates in Miami, for example. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about transaction costs. So going back to our conclusion. So reducing transaction costs. Again, even though these are small deals, transaction costs are not necessarily smaller. And so here we really wanted to highlight the need for efficiency and for making sure that you've got the right folks on your team and the right relationships in place. So I'm going to go first to the negotiation and deal closing section. So here we highlight some different just tips and key criteria you should consider. And honestly, you'll read these and say, wow, that's not necessarily specific to small to medium multifamily, and that's true. So these things are really applicable across the board, but some items like appraisal gaps, contamination, or title issues are really specific to existing properties and older properties. So really wanted to highlight those given that the majority of the small multifamily stock was built before 1980 or so, give or take. Other things we have highlighted here, tips for negotiating, deal closings, common challenges you might experience, and also the expertise that you really want to have on board on your team. And then I'd also just like to remind you again of the relationship building section that Anne spoke of, which highlights different relationships you really want to build out as you're starting to think about small multifamily acquisition and preservation, and those network maps, which highlight where you can actually meet some of those folks and start to build some of those relationships. Lastly, back to our conclusion, we're going to talk about materials. So again, we're talking about older properties for the most part, some of which may have been rehabbed, but many of which have not been significantly, which is obviously contributing to their continued affordability. But as we're entering into deals to preserve the affordability, we also want to make improvements to the properties so that they can live on as affordable housing in the long term. I'm going to highlight two resource documents which were created. These are in the tools and downloads section. So first, we have energy efficiency guides for Atlanta and Miami. And I'm just going to escape out of this website real fast if I can figure out how to do that. One moment. I'm going to have to get fancy. There we go. Sorry, guys. Give me a second, and I'm going to pull up those guides. Sorry, getting them on the right screen. Okay, there we go. So our green team and enterprise that administers the Enterprise Green Communities program created these scopes of work, one for Florida and one for Georgia. These limited scopes of work focus on ways to improve the energy efficiency, water efficiency, and quality of multifamily housing. Many of these are low to no cost, so we're not necessarily talking about major efforts. We really wanted to create a simple tool that property managers could use in conjunction with the development of a scope for a larger rehab or renovation. But it also could be used when you're doing individual things like replacing toilets to identify the most efficient product you can purchase. We did make sure that these reference state-specific codes and rebates so that they could be a guiding tool for your work. But again, things change and evolve, and so I just want to remind folks to always double check those things as you're working. We do plan to offer a follow-up webinar later this fall to do a deeper dive into the green and energy efficiency efforts. The other simple tool is a resilience assessment template. Just to give you a quick kind of bit more than a back of the envelope chart to chart out where you might have risks to buildings so you can start to think about resilience. Also just want to highlight here that Enterprise is working with the City of Miami on a new resilience audit program that will release in early 2021. So stay tuned as we are developing some very in-depth tools which focus on housing affordability. All right, I am now going to bounce us back to our PowerPoint. And we're going to take a deep dive into our tools. So we have two tools we'll spend some time on today, the evaluation scorecards, which Anne referenced, and then also we're going to spend some time on the financial modeling tool. So I'm going to go ahead and pass to Laura, who's going to walk us through the creation of the scorecard and give you guys a feel for what it means and how to use it.
Great, thanks Sarah, and great to be with you all today to dive into the evaluation scorecard. As Anne mentioned, there's a lot of different factors to take into account when assessing a strong preservation opportunity, specifically for small and medium multifamily unsubsidized housing. And this evaluation scorecard is really designed to help understand all those factors in one place. Before I dive into the scorecard itself and talk a little bit more about each of those factors and how the scorecard works and evaluating them, I did want to talk a little bit about how we got to this scorecard. So one thing, it was developed using 3 primary qualitative inputs, one of which was already referenced in terms of the national best practices around working with small and medium multifamily property, as well as preservation of housing affordability more broadly. The second was that for both Miami and Atlanta, we did a content analysis of local housing and housing related plans to understand what are the priorities for housing in each place, so we could incorporate those directly into the scorecard as well, so it's tailored to each city. And then finally, the third primary input was a review of local data sources to assist with the evaluation guidance to enable users like yourself to rely on commonly used local sources as you evaluate the properties. We also then benefited from a vetting process among local stakeholders, and really appreciate for those of you on the line who helped with that process, your input in getting this to be a final version we're able to share with you today. So now I'm going to move, share my screen and share the a sample evaluation scorecard with you all. You're able to download one specific to Miami directly from the Toolkit website. And when you do, you'll see that it opens and you have 2 tabs, the scorecard itself, as well as the evaluation guidance tab. The property scorecard is what you're able to fill out. You can add multiple property locations and compare and assess properties that way. And then the second tab is the guidance that enables you to, sorry, trying to get there. That walks you through some of the big questions and considerations, as well as the data sources for how to fill out the information on the first tab. So I wanted to take a minute to walk through each of the factors and how they're represented here. So as Anne mentioned, we incorporated the 4 specific evaluation factors into the scorecard, starting with property characteristics. And property characteristics really focuses on the overall condition of the property, its size, and who the property serves today. Project feasibility focuses on a project's ability to meet basic regulatory requirements, including compliance with land use and building code standards. And it also is the factor where projects' eligibility for financing and public subsidies are considered. The third factor is neighborhood market conditions, which focuses on how neighborhood market conditions are changing or may change based on common indicators of market activity. And we also use this as a proxy for financial feasibility and risk of displacement or loss of unsubsidized affordable small and medium multifamily properties. And then the last factor is neighborhood access, which focuses on access to common destinations, critical services, and other key connections that may help address or make connections to access to opportunity and promote economic mobility. So Sarah pre-populated the version we're looking at right now. And in that version, you can see that among the 3 properties, they all scored relatively similar. The total possible score you can get for the Miami scorecard is 34. While there's no high or low score per se, there's no threshold to say this is a good opportunity or not so good opportunity. Generally speaking, the evaluation is structured that the higher the score, the more feasible the project is from a preservation perspective for this property type, as well as stronger alignment with local housing goals and priorities. That being said, in this sort of situation where you have similar scoring, it's sometimes helpful to go back to the individual factors and again, what may matter to you in your organization or the type of development priorities that you have. So for instance, if project feasibility, so making sure that there's no approval or development review hurdles, maximizing eligibility for public subsidy, things like that are really important. Then this one in Little Haiti may rise to the top versus if access and key connections to neighborhood services and amenities are really critical. The one in Little Havana may be more important when you're kind of in a tiebreaker situation. So with that, I will turn things back over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about these properties and finish out the review of the scorecard.
Great, thanks, Laura. And I am actually, in the interest of time, because I think we have actually covered things quite nicely. I'm going to go ahead and shift us. Hold on. Yes, I want to the financial modeling tool. Just so folks know, these are the 3 properties I looked at, chosen at random. One in Little Havana, one in Little Haiti, and then one in Alabata. And Laura really did highlight a lot of the key factors that you'd want to take a closer look at. So stay tuned for a deeper dive into these in the future as well. But I want to make sure we have time for the financial modeling, so I'm going to go ahead and pass to Zach.
Great, thanks, Sarah. My name is Zach Patton with Enterprise Advisors, and I have the pleasure of talking with you today about the financial modeling tool. So this is a tool we developed based on a pro forma model, which estimates annual revenue and costs over time to paint a picture of a given project's financial viability, given a set of assumptions about that property, user specified information about the property, the capital stack, and so forth. So the goal of this tool is really to produce a high-level go or no-go assessment based on that overall financial feasibility, and then to also report some additional evaluation metrics that our interviews with stakeholders and our research determined were more frequently used to evaluate those projects. Before we take a look at the tool itself, I wanted just to take a moment to point out a few key considerations that we were working with in our approach to creating this tool. So the first is that we were really working to strike a balance between flexibility and simplicity for the user, which, if for any of you who have experience making tools before, is always a crux of the work. So on the one hand, we didn't want to create a model that was so complex and had so many inputs and outputs that people would be intimidated and not want to use the tool, or it would be too time-consuming to use. But on the other hand, we wanted enough complexity and nuance that the results are going to be accurate and it's going to be flexible enough to be able to accommodate a wider range of scenarios that folks might want to be exploring in their work. So that was sort of a constant question that we were grappling with in creating this. And so one way we struck that balance was by trying to do as much of the work for you as we possibly could. So that included identifying and vetting assumptions that apply to Miami as a market area, and then also making those assumptions transparent and then allowing users to change them if they chose to. And then the second thing we did was to really create two different versions of the tool. One that is a more simple web-based version that really requires a minimal set of user inputs and then relies on those more standard assumptions that our interviews determined were likely to fit the market. And then a second tool that is a downloadable Excel model that's a lot more customizable, has more comprehensive set of inputs, and can more readily be integrated into workflows and evaluation approaches that you all may already be using in your work. So if you're just looking to plug in a few quick numbers and see what a result looks like, you can use the online tool. If you really want to dig in deep and really modify those assumptions and do some sensitivity analysis, then the downloadable version might be the better choice. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at what these tools look like. Okay, so you can see, I'll go full screen here. There we go. So you can see that we are in the toolkit that Sarah and Anne have been talking through different sections. And so you can click down here under Tools and Downloads on the financial modeling tool. And you can see that up here at the top, you can choose to download the full Excel-based version. If we scroll down a little farther, we'll see the interactive version. And by the way, if you'd like to see more information about how we arrived at the assumptions we used or the data they're based on, you can click on these links here to take you to some documentation of our methods and a data dictionary and so forth. So let's take a look at the interactive version first for a moment. So this interface, as I mentioned, is kind of pre-populated with data based on kind of standard assumptions for the market and the preservation approach. So you have some kind of starting values to work with, but it still does require some level of input by the user to account for the specifics of a given property, the unit affordability levels, the plan for capital sources, and so on. So the first decision you really have to make is which market you're going to be working in. So we can select Miami, and the model will open up here. And you can see that over here we have kind of a sidebar navigation for different characteristics. So we can specify the sort of level of intensity of preservation that's going to be required for this preservation work. We can specify characteristics of the property, which is going to include things like property tax rates, whether the building has non-residential rentable space, affordability, which covers the mix of unit sizes and rents, preservation costs, which include some place-based considerations, like in the case of Miami, whether we need to account for hurricane codes. And then lastly, capital sources, which allows for specifying characteristics of debt sources, equity sources, and then a few forms of subsidy. So we don't have time to walk through each of these sections in depth today, but I did want to point out just a few things about how we designed this tool generally. So right now I've clicked on the property characteristics section, and you can see some information here. So the first thing is that you'll notice two main colors that stand out. The first are blue boxes. So you see some up here, some down here, depending on which section you're on. And those blue boxes represent outputs of the model and contextual values. And then secondly, you'll see these green boxes, which are really the places that we've designated for user inputs in the interactive tool. In the downloadable version of this tool, you can manipulate all of these things, but in the online one, we're really just asking you for what is included in the green boxes here. So that makes it easy to figure out where you need to be concerned about specifying things, and that color coding, by the way, is also consistent across both the interactive tool and the downloadable version of the tool. So you'll see the same fields in green in both places, so you can kind of go back and forth if necessary. As the second thing I wanted to point out is that as you navigate through these different sections, this project summary section is consistent. And so this contains our evaluation metrics that help us understand the financial feasibility of this project. And so first we have our overall feasibility indicator here, which is really based on two criteria. Number one is whether the project is expected to meet the target IRR, which you can specify down here in the capital sources. There'll be and it could be an IRR requirement on the part of the developer and other equity sources. So you can specify one for each source, and it'll kind of pick the highest value to use as a criteria here. And then the second criteria is whether the project is expected to meet an assumed debt service coverage ratio that our research determined would be prevalent among lenders in this market, which for Miami was 1.15, though I will say that this was established pre-pandemic. So to the extent there's been changes in the lending environment, it may make sense in this case to experiment with that in the downloadable version, where you can specify the debt service coverage ratio thresholds that you would expect to encounter. So if both of those criteria are met, then this box here will show that the project is feasible, and it will turn blue. If it's not feasible, then the model is going to provide an estimate of how much it would take to fill the gap, either the gap in the internal rate of return and or the gap in the debt service coverage ratio in order to make this project feasible. So we can see here with just the default inputs where we see a subsidy of about $68,000 needed for this hypothetical property. And the idea with this subsidy is that it would take the form of a deferred interest forgivable loan, perhaps, that could either help to increase the internal rate of return and or the debt service coverage ratio. So in addition to this, we realized that this way of evaluating the project is not how everyone is going to approach it, and we heard of a variety of approaches in our interviews with local developers. So we've also provided some additional metrics here that can be used to better understand the characteristics of this project and the overall feasibility. So you are welcome to take an alternative approach to thinking about how feasible this deal is and how attractive it is. So we don't have time for a full case study here today, but I did just want to point out that as kind of a quick example of how we could use this information. So let's say that we've already gone through the process and specified our capital sources and our unit mix and our acquisition costs and everything like that throughout the sections in the different sections here. And we still end up with this $68,000 gap. So we can try modifying the values in the green cells to see what the impact of changing some of these things would be. So let's say that we were working in a jurisdiction that had a tax abatement program that enabled us to bring our rate from 2.13%, which I think is based on the rate for the city. And let's say that it allowed us to bring that down to 1.5% for the 10-year horizon period of the project. So you can see that just by changing this, the tool is going to adjust, and the limiting factor in this case was that our internal rate of return was going to be lower than our target. And so by dropping that property tax rate, we were able to increase our return enough that our investor would be satisfied and this project would be now feasible from the perspective of capital sources. So I will leave it there as far as the interactive tool goes, but I did want to show you quickly what the downloadable version looks like. So we can click on either one of these to download the tool for the respective market. And when we open that up, you can see that it's an Excel-based tool. There's an instruction sheet that will give you more information about the content. And I also wanted to note that the password is here if you wanted to, we locked the cells so that folks wouldn't accidentally change the underlying model. But if you did want to modify that in some way to accommodate a different deal structure or something, then you're welcome to do so, and the password is listed here in the instructions. So when we look at the model, the information is organized according to the same categories as in the interactive tool. And as I mentioned, the cells that are highlighted in green are the ones that also show up in the interactive version, so you can easily translate between them. The ones in blue are some of the assumptions that don't show up in the interactive version, but are underlying values that in this version you're welcome to modify and see the same sets of outputs that were available in the interactive tool. So with that quick demo, I'll close by saying that this is a really interesting tool for us to develop, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from folks that we interviewed to create it and that we had test it. And so we'd love to hear from those of you on the call if you have found it useful, or as you're testing it out, if you find it useful, and if you have ideas for how we can improve it or expand on this work. So with that, I will turn things back over to Sarah to close us out.
Great, thanks so much, Zach. Appreciate it. As Zach noted, we didn't have time to go super in-depth today on the tool, but we do hope to do a follow-up where we can do a deeper dive and kind of a workshop, if you will, for the financial modeling tool. So we feel like it's a really useful tool that we want a lot of folks to check out. So just the last thing I want to highlight for folks, in the appendices, we do have project profiles. So we have one for Miami, which is the 16 corner project, and I think I saw that Average Jane was on. And so we're able to provide an overview of the project, their keys to success, photos where possible, how the property is identified, where relationship building played a role, how the financing was able to work, include a capital stack, and then more information about the rehab and the level of rehab that they chose to do. Lastly, following up with property management details. So we're able to provide right now a project profile for Miami, for Atlanta, similar kind of framework. And then this is a national profile that Anne referenced earlier. So we do hope to expand the case studies and profiles we have. So if folks have deals that you've been able to preserve that you think are good typologies of this work, we'd love to talk and learn more about what you're doing. And then to end, just want to see if there are any other questions. I've got one Q&A in the question, one question in the Q&A box, excuse me. If anyone has any others, feel free to go ahead and type those in, and I will answer it now or follow up. So the first question is asking what financial resources Enterprise would offer to assist with the acquisition and rehab of an existing 30-unit apartment complex that needs moderate rehab. So right now, Enterprise is a CDFI, so we do lending, and our CDFI would look at a 30-unit project and determine if it was feasible for us. The other thing I'd like to point out, though, Enterprise just completed business planning with a group of consultants that was focused on modeling a financing structure to preserve small to medium multifamily in Miami. We just finished that last week, and we'll be working with local partners such as Miami Homes for All and others to start to look at how we might actually pilot this model, raise the capital that's needed to pilot it, and also work with some of our nonprofit partners who are actively doing this work. So more to come on that for sure. We recognize that there's a real gap in the capital system for this stock and want to be a part of that solution. So thanks, Doug, for that question. Any other questions from the crowd? All right, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop us at exactly 2 o'clock. I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us. Thanks to our advisors team, Miami Homes for All and South Florida CDC for also joining today, and look forward to hearing from everyone as you use the tool. Here's the website. We'll make sure to send that out via email as well. And my contact information, feel free to reach out to me directly as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.